Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show. Today, bringing another really awesome guest involved in science and technology, creating a better tomorrow. Today on the show, we have the honor of being joined by Cristina Durán, who is the president of Evinova. They are a health tech company that's focused on empowering life science organizations to accelerate better health outcomes with a really interesting suite of globally scaled digital health solutions, empowering sites, sponsors, and CROs to ultimately optimize the entire clinical development life cycle. Prior to launching Evinova, Cristina led AstraZeneca's digital health function and R&D across various therapy areas, including oncology, cardiovascular, renal metabolism, and respiratory and immunology. And as previously, Cristina has held numerous leadership roles at the senior level at AstraZeneca across commercial, in-country commercial, finance, and R&D. Before joining AstraZeneca, Cristina was a senior management consultant at Accenture, and she is very passionate about both innovation and increasing enterprise value, inspiring organizations to change using future technologies, and has spoken extensively on these themes. Originally, she is a chartered accountant, as well as having completed the MIT Leading Enterprise Transformation Program. A lot to get into today. Really honored to have with us Cristina Durán. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for such a introduction, such a long introduction. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, it's a very interesting suite of topics that we're going to be getting into today. I would just, love to start off as we typically do by handing you the floor for a couple of minutes just to talk a little bit more about you. I noticed that, prior to anything involving R&D and clinical development, you served in a variety of roles in companies as diverse as 3M, as Dell, obviously your Accenture experiences. Talk a little bit about your background in finance and a little bit about sort of when that transition into clinical development transformation, let's say, happened in your career.
Maybe I need to go a little bit personal to try to explain my life choices. So I was actually stranded by my parents when I was a teenager. So I had no home, no support. So the reasons of some of my choices at the beginning of my career was safety. Was the biggest safety net in terms of career role that you can have. That there are many of them, but it was getting a roof over my head was priority number one. So that's why the reason that I chose finance, and there's a route of finance, which it was more for chartered accountant is more for decision making. So should you open a company? Should you go to China? Which is still relevant in terms of the roles that obviously I do today. What is interesting is that my first finance role was extremely boring, so boring that I learned coding so it could automate the work that I was meant to be doing. So I had code to do the work, and then they asked me to automate the code for the rest of my team. So I think very early in my career, it was like change and transformation was very much on the cards. So as you highlighted, I did spend quite a few years in tech companies and doing transformation, but also finance roles within them, and then running a lot of change within Accenture as well. So I was actually headhunted into pharma when there was the period of loss of exclusivity in big pharma, and they needed a lot of change. So there is a theme in my career, and now with obviously the opportunities of digital and AI. Obviously the two halves of my career, the one outside pharma in tech and transforming other type of industries, and then coming to pharma, doing several roles, coming into R&D, and then discovering that where should be the obviously the gems of life sciences, how new medicines get created, my realization that was extremely manual, extremely paper heavy. And comparing it to what I had seen in other industries, and obviously comparing to what I had seen, 10 or 15 years prior, for me, it was a complete shock. So I did put my hand up and said, I think you need to, you probably need to do a change here, a large transformation, have a good vision, ambitious of what it could be. And that was the start of obviously starting a lot of the transformation within AstraZeneca at the time. But the same change is needed across the industry, same problems, same processes. So that's the reason that we set it up Evinova as a separate company. And now we do this not only for obviously AstraZeneca, but for many others as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about sort of the the digitalization, let's say, across the AstraZeneca organization. You eventually, as mentioned, take the role of Chief Digital Health Officer for R&D in the AstraZeneca global organization, and there's this very interesting framework that you write about, and we'll talk about it as we get to Evinova, but it existed, I guess, a little bit before Evinova, of course, and it's something that you call at AstraZeneca the 6R framework. It's all about the right things that involve the right patient, tissue, target, safety, commercial, but integrating the principle of right digital. And I think this is kind of core to not just what was happening at AZ, but what you're doing with the new organization. Talk about this framework a bit, because I know you published about it most recently, actually, in a paper, sort of going into your experiences, which was in Nature Medicine in 2023. But take us into the realm of 6R framework.
Yeah, so AstraZeneca had a 5R in terms of how to successfully increase productivity of clinical development programs. So as part of governance, what they would do is have you reviewed how this program can be successful by ensuring you have the right target, the right patients, ensuring that obviously the different elements of the compound was right. What it was not reviewed was, do you have, are you still doing it on paper?
Right.
Do you have the right digital approach in terms of how you're going to run the program? Now, that I didn't discover at first. At first, it's obviously, can you do it digitally differently? And you can demonstrate that you can make a huge difference by running the program digitally. What we couldn't do, and life sciences is very good at it, is they're very good at running pilots. They're less good at the scaling than what it should be done across the portfolio. Now, every study is very different. So it's not that you can, just do one thing, it's just going to work for every single study in the same way. And every therapeutic area is slightly different as well. So we thought about, well, for running change across life sciences, you need evidence. So if it's not in Nature, they're not going to read it. Right. So you need evidence. You need to have the evidence that it works. And also you have to have a framework to make sure that when they are thinking about a new compound or a new program, how do they approach it from from all the different elements. So we actually suggested that we should have a target. We said 90% of programs should have a digital strategy. We say 90% because you're always going to get the odd one that feels that is very different. Now, once you say 90, nobody wants to be in the 10%. So we did get 100% of programs reviewing their digital strategy before going ahead in terms of as part of designing the study. And then it's considering how you can run a study in a way that is much better for patients, it's obviously easier to recruit, and it's obviously much better to compile that information. And we've proven that we had two learnings that we wanted to share as part of that framework. One, that is not only that you have to design the study differently, so you have to design it with digital in mind, but you do need to design the study differently. You cannot take a study that you have designed and then say, and now let's do something digital on it. That doesn't work. And the second piece is that it's not just throwing a lot of digital to it. I think there has been lots of examples where they've add lots of different vendors, or they add lots of different devices. If you're on the other side, if you're a patient or if you're a hospital, and then you're having to run the study and you have 12 different things that are not connected, you're just building a complete mess in terms of, how to run that study. So the study, doing the study design differently, but also integrating that technology in a really great experience that obviously tech companies, Amazon and others, they know really how to do to make sure that that experience is seamless is extremely important as well. So yes, it's important, the creation of the framework, but obviously it's also the evidence in terms of if you do those two things, design the study and make the experience integrated, you can have great results. And we prove, as part of the paper, obviously those results were highlighted as well.
Mm-hmm. And I thought, along those lines, and I know this happened, I guess, a little bit before Evinova was formed, but I think it's a really interesting example of the type of things you were thinking about. When, one of the papers that popped up that you're involved in, this was back in 2021, July, in Frontiers in Oncology. And it's basically a paper that talks about, we have these early endpoints in oncology and cancer therapies like progression-free survival, which we hear all about on all the oncology shows we know. We also need late stage endpoints, and they sort of don't really exist that well, and we have to sort of compile them in interesting ways. And this paper was quite interesting because you talk about, again, using the right digital and sort of the right concepts here, as you were just mentioning, in creating, the appropriate parameters, building the right biomarkers, and then we'll get to AI and machine learning in a bit, but bringing machine learning in to really understand, okay, we have early, but we also need the late stage understanding of how these drugs are working, what they're doing. Talk about this a little bit, because I think it's a really fascinating paper. We profiled some of AstraZeneca's oncology work, and it's interesting, to see how the digital and the biologic come together in this example.
So you've got a really good angle to bring in terms of the discussion. So endpoints actually, so it takes a long time to change endpoints in clinical development. Yeah. You need to move, you obviously need to compile a lot of the evidence that is, is relevant, is effective, is equivalent to the old endpoints that they are more traditional, but also the regulators are happy as well that with all the evidence to also move to the new way of evaluating new medicines. They get used to the all endpoints as well. So what we have, we're working very heavily in terms of ensuring that what are the endpoints that can help in terms of decision making, both in the early compounds as well as late phase. It's harder to change late phase because you do need those regulators to be happy to give you an approval based on that change. Mm-hmm. But a significant improvement can be found in the early phases of clinical development as well. If I give you an example, sure. Otherwise, in respiratory, for example, in late stage, an exacerbation, a respiratory exacerbation is actually not measured as an endpoint on did you have a lung event or a physical event. Actually, mm-hmm. is measured, the endpoint, the regulatory endpoint is, have you had a prescription for 3 days of oral corticosteroids? Now, what if it's someone that has complained a lot to the physician? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It wasn't really that bad, but has had a prescription. And there has been some evaluation that probably 30% of those acute exacerbations are actually, when you measure the lungs at the same time in combination, is not as such an exacerbation. So you can see that the traditional one is actually not that measurable or accurate. It's actually, yes, you had 3 days of prescriptions by a physician that then are considered, obviously, but there are also different cultures across different countries mm-hmm. on prescriptions levels too. So there's lots of different, you could complain so much about the endpoint. There is a lot of evidence, nearly probably more than 5 years of evidence of the complex endpoint, which is a compositive endpoint to measuring the lungs, but also measuring how the patient's symptoms are and evaluating in combination to the prescriptions in order to have a more complete picture mm-hmm. on how that individual, is. And it has been proven through evidence that actually within 3 months of running all those data, you could see the same split in terms of the curves if the medicine is working that you would have seen with a traditional point traditional endpoint in probably 6 to 12 months. So in 3 months, you get to see the effect that before it would have taken a lot much longer. So what we've been able to do is actually to run studies in phase 2 that need 50% less patients and can be run so much faster because you have so much more data to be able to make that decision. Now we're obviously working with the FDA and EMEA to make sure that we can use that endpoint for phase 3 registrational studies and have a more complete picture for registrational studies, but those are still in discussion. But that's an example in terms of changing endpoints. I think what happens is you can change some of the phase 1, phase 2, make early decisions in terms of before proceeding to phase 3. It takes longer to change the endpoint for phase 3 studies.
Got it. Makes sense. Yeah, that's again, it's an elegant approach to very serious, let's say, clinical output there. So I appreciated that paper. Yeah, Cristina, can you talk a little bit about? And I know some of these tools, they have different names, but you've really developed a very sort of interesting suite of these tools that sort of range from everywhere from sort of predicting, and I know there's this principle of these moments that matter to patients and what makes for a proper clinical trial experience, and this tool called Merlin that you have. You have other tools like Unify, which has to do specifically with monitoring, and then something called IDA, which is the automatic identification, detection, adjudication, which can do things remotely in terms of predicting adverse events. I know you have a very complex suite. I'm sure there's others in there that you've put together over the years as you've created this portfolio, but take a little time to, I guess, reintroduce sort of when the decision was made to, okay, Evinova is not going to, it's great for AstraZeneca, but it's going to be great for everybody else. We're going to create this freestanding organization, and then talk a little bit about these different tools, because each one is equally interesting to the next. But, love to sort of explain to the audience how this all comes together into this really interesting package that you're offering to everybody, the entire industry.
Yeah, no, maybe let's zoom out and then I can explain.
Sure.
So so first of all, the realization, and actually we can link to the previous discussions. So to move regulators, it cannot be each pharma company doing something different. So it's industry problems. So we knew, and we created solutions that even hospitals were saying, well, ideally, we don't want the solution per pharma company. Thank you very much to run clinical studies. We run, industry-wide solutions. So we had two options. Either we said, okay, we'll wait for that company that brings industry-wide solutions for the problems that we couldn't find solutions, or we can become the industry-wide company. So we chose, obviously, the latter. So it's to solve problems that are wide industry problems that together it will make life sciences much faster for the greater good. So yes, it's a competitive advantage for a pharma company for the short term, but actually to move regulators as well, you need to do it across the industry. If we zoom out in clinical development and we look into phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 at all the phases, let's say it takes about 8 years to go from point A to point B. 8 years. Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. Maybe 4 years patients are in treatments, where you're running the experiment, but the other 4 is process. Yeah. It's literally manual, crazy process. So what we do is try to say, okay, could we run that 50% faster? What would it take now with digital and AI to run that 50% faster? And there are several components, and that's how we align our products. So study design, it probably takes the least amount of time, but it's actually the most important, because if you get a study design wrong, then you've run a very long experiment for not a successful outcome. Yeah. So we do have a product for study design using digital and AI to help the study teams to make that much easier for them at the point of a study design. Once you design the study, you need to obviously produce a lot of documentation to run the study. So we are doing a lot of efforts on doing the document authoring and join up of documents with AI. Now that you can do a lot of that, more than 200 documents get created across clinical development. Quite a lot of time embedded today on manually updating documents. All that with AI is going to be transformed. then it takes a lot of time in terms of patient recruitment, but this is linked to how you run the study. Our unified platform, and this is linking how patients can participate in the study and how sites get to connect with patients and collect the data. We have proven that actually, if you run a study that is much easier for patients to participate, no surprise, surprise, more patients join. So we can see, we have proven actually, that was our hypothesis. You need to run the design differently, but make it much easier for patients to participate, and the recruitment should be better. 2 times faster, we've seen the recruitment, because more patients could join the study and participate if 60% of the visits can be done from home, of the data being collected from home as well. So we have solutions both in terms of how to run the clinical study, within a sponsor's life sciences, and then how to run it from the patient and site perspective and make that experience a lot more connected as well. So the last one, in terms of running the study in a much simpler way for patients, we do through our unified platform. We've run it now in 54 countries. We've run it in many registrational studies, and we've got amazing successes in terms of the outputs, in terms of time acceleration, as I highlighted, 2 times faster, and actually reduces cost overall, because if you run the study faster, you reduce physical visits, you can make it much, much faster, much cheaper, and obviously much better for patients as well. And then within our Evinova platform, we can obviously support it both on the study design, the document authoring, how to review your portfolio across the studies and make it easier, obviously from our sponsor side, to run the clinical development process as well.
And one other interesting part of it, and obviously you being a company, you understand oncology and respiratory and CV metabolic, but you're also a rare disease company, and you did acquire Alexion a couple of years ago. I thought this part about this, or the rare disease patient friction coefficient measure, was kind of cool because obviously rare diseases has been, well, not just for our show, it's been kind of a hot topic, but clearly a very important area when we add up all the patients out there. And can you talk about that for a couple of minutes, guys? That's another interesting tool. We don't know anything about big pharma and rare diseases, but you're quite active there as well.
So, if it's always difficult to find patients to run the clinical study, imagine for rare patients, which are much more rare. So making those clinical studies much easier for rare patients to be able to participate, and obviously with all their both the location, the distance probably to a site that obviously where they're running the study. So the ability to run either the study in a decentralized way, where you can run the full study from home, or having a minimum amount of visits, that is extremely important for rare diseases as well. What we also discover, maybe is a good point to mention, is that it's important to, within the disease area teams, and this we do across many different pharma, is to work not only on the next study, but across the disease. So let's take rare diseases. What would be really critical for rare diseases to have in the next few years as part of clinical development to move rare diseases to a new phase? What is important for oncology? What is important for cardiovascular, metabolics, and now all these obesity studies? So we run those strategies at the disease area level, and then we enable it from we think of what would the regulation need for that type of disease, but also what patients in that indication would need, and try to meet them in order to be able to run studies in a very different way. And this has been really, really successful.
It's again, I wanted to point that part out because I think it's another interesting piece to portfolio that you're putting together there and have experience in. Cristina, I just wanted to come back to the other point that you mentioned before in terms of the thinking of industry-wide problems, and just one other interesting paper that popped out to me that you're involved in, and this was from last year in April 2024, was this JAMA paper entitled Remote Monitoring and Data Collection for Decentralized Clinical Trials. And you've taken us a little bit down this road now, and here you had to get together with all your competitors, right? I mean, everyone's in here in terms of Amgen and Genentech and Novartis and so forth, plus hospitals and in multiple continents, healthcare organizations. Talk a little bit about sort of what you came together, how you came together, let's say, and a little bit of what you learned here, because clearly we were here 2025, 5% of patients getting involved in any clinical trial at all in terms of looking at oncology. We got to go better. what were the discussions like? Can you just talk a little bit about how you collaborate? Because clearly you're collaborating and publishing this with everybody, and obviously we need new thinking and new momentum towards how this all works for everybody. So take us into this paper, if you would.
Yeah, so this was a collaboration coordinated by the Bloomberg Cancer Coalition. So they're trying to obviously solve how to accelerate novel cancer treatment with new methods. And one of the and they coordinate across many industry members. We obviously were involved before from our time in AstraZeneca, but we've been involved now as a separate company as part of Evinova as well. So, and we serve many of those pharma companies too. What we wanted to review as part of that paper was looking at, from a digital perspective in oncology. Oncology has historically been behind other disease areas, where we saw a lot of change with digital, maybe in how to run cardiovascular respi studies, but less so in oncology. Oncology was seen as more, well, you need to come and have the treatment at the hospital, therefore you need to come to the hospital to run the clinical study much more closely. So the paper was indicating in terms of, well, could you actually do more of those visits remotely? Through COVID, oncology studies, 50% of the visits were done remotely through COVID. So couldn't it be outside COVID also reduce some of the physical visits as well? And what are the elements of digital that companies were seeing that would be accelerated in the next 5 years, and how many of their studies were incorporated now, and what was their goal to be in 5 years from now? So let's say, for example, collecting symptoms from patients, where they're still doing it on paper, or where they're using digital solutions to collect patient symptoms. What it was surprising to me is that some companies were still quite, low in the percentage, and still the majority of their studies were run on paper. As part of that collection, obviously, it was a good benchmark or anchoring where companies wanted to be, and it was much more decentralization of clinical trials, much more of digital, but also something that we've been evolving since that paper is the ability in oncology to monitor patients regularly for toxicities. Oncology treatments can be, obviously, they have, you are trying to kill the cancer, so they can be quite toxic. So can you monitor patients regularly outside of visits from home to be able to predict any alerts, to make sure that you can ensure that the patient is okay, telling them to call their care team if they need to, but also ensure that the site is aware that they may need to take an action as well. So that has been really big in oncology. So remote patient monitoring for toxicities post the paper was written, and is now accelerating across the industry as well.
Excellent. Cristina, one of the AstraZeneca guests that I've had on the show a couple of years back was Dr. Ola Enquist, who heads up molecular artificial intelligence, works in AI and machine learning and sort of, structure-based drug design and all that. And clearly that's, been a very hot area, but AI is, raising, up everywhere, across the industry, not just pharma, health tech, everywhere we go. I'd love to sort of get your perspective on where this is all going, because clearly, I'm excited about the drug discovery stuff. I've had a lot of guests on, but we're still a little far from pushing a button here and having a $50 billion blockbuster pop out there. But clearly, the role for these tools, especially in your business, and the way that everything that you're mentioning, from screening the right patients to getting into the right trials to monitoring the adverse events and all that, really, here and now applications that are quite relevant. And I'd love to, to take a little time just to talk about how you view AI, what you view for the coming years, and a little bit, get rid of a little bit of the hype, but really talk about, the here and now.
Yeah, so obviously the opportunities with transforming clinical development now with AI are mind-blowingly exciting. I think what is possible now, these days, it wasn't possible 2 years ago. So both with Gen AI, but also with agentic AI, the opportunities to transform those 4 years that I was highlighting of process becomes what it was probably a very ambitious goal of 50% seems totally doable So there is probably there's going to be a bifork within clinical development. One is developing very large language models, specifically for oncology, for specific disease, where you want to basically collect as much information as possible and data points in that disease area to be able to run experiments, a little bit as part of your design, predicting, as you were designing the study, what the outcome of that experiment would be based on all the data that you have available. And there is more collaborations of collecting quite a lot of disease data, including genetic data, that will enable to do that. So there is large language models availability in science. There is the other part, which is transforming clinical development processes with AI, enabling that running of the clinical trials in a very different way. So we are really excited to be able to do, both, as I was highlighting before, rather than having a process that is very document manual heavy, my personal belief and I think is across the industry is that's going to be moving to digital packages. Regulators will not want a submission document, even if it's electronic. They will want a digital package. So there will be a transition over the coming years to move from paper documents and documents being submitted to digital packages being enabled. So a full digitization of clinical development end to end, from how the study is designed in a standard format. And obviously the Transcelerate has been working a lot on those on those standards, to then automating completely, imagine the design of a study and being able to have all the documentation ready with all the information that you have available, and obviously being able to, as digital packages as well, and being able to move very, very fast through the process. What is also really exciting is the ability of supporting sites or hospital in ways that it wasn't possible before. Each of them has obviously an electronic health record that is being, configured, customized to death in each of the hospitals. And then obviously all this technology has been put to run clinical trials that is very separate, creating a lot of manual work for hospitals. So the availability to be able to use agentic AI to solve for quite a lot of the manual work as well that today happens in the hospitals is going to be extremely exciting to make succeed over the next coming years. So I see a true opportunity with AI to obviously do that full transformation within clinical development. It does, however, requires not just general models, in my view. It does require that you obviously do the training of the models, that you make sure that are fit for purpose, but you also need to change the process. It's a very heavily regulated process, so having a good, cool LLM is just not going to change the whole thing. So you do need to partner and obviously ensure that from a platform perspective, you're able to change that process in the new way. So that's what we're trying to do in Evinova for the industry. So how to work towards the future in terms of that digitization of the process of those digital packages that would be required, and work through have it all integrated into one platform from end to end within clinical development. I think we see lots of different companies trying to focus on a specific part of the puzzle, but then it has the complexity of bringing it all together. Obviously, we do lots of partnerships as well to make sure that we can integrate what is best in the market as well.
And one other topic along those lines, because you mentioned we need to integrate, we need the proper partners, and we need to put these systems together. But there's this, and it was very interesting. You were interviewed for in Pharmaceutical Executive. This was it was back in September 2024 on this the transformation playbook for moving from pilots to really scalable systems. And you bring up this term called Pilotitis, which is sort of this theme. A lot of pharma companies say, we'll try this stuff, but at the end of the day, we gotta, this isn't going to work at one place, as you're pointing out. We need, thousands of hospitals and healthcare systems and organizations involved. Talk a little bit about this. And this goes back not just to what you're doing at AZBT, your days in consulting and thinking about, hey, we got to scale these things up. The tools are great, but unless you scale them up, they're not good for too many. They're not going to help the patients we need them to help. Walk us through this a bit, and why sort of scaling, getting beyond this pilotitis has been such a tough thing for organizations to do.
is still happening within life sciences. So I think is rooted on how drug development and drug discovery works. You try lots of things and then see which one sticks to then follow through. So they get really excited about the innovation, and let's be honest, in some of the large pharma companies there is heavy politics too. So one obviously is the making sure that you have all the evidence. So you may run the experiment and they say, but do you have all the evidence? Do you need to run another experiment? Because they're really questioning the data. So then they end up in a constant give me more reasons to believe that the evidence worked before we scale. So they have lots of questions before, well, in other industries, like, oh yeah, it works, woo. They will go more for it versus questioning so much from an evidence perspective. So that's one part. The second is that because they're very functional, very rooted expertise, like regulatory, clinical operations, safety. Some of them, they would try to run some of their innovation within process separately. But the reality is that they're all integrated. They're all trying to work together in order to run a study or to answer a specific scientific question. So how we're trying to solve for, the pilotitis, that it does work with, it does happen within life sciences, is one, ensure that we can zoom out in terms of, what is the holistic problem and understand the problem well. As well as plan to solve it at scale. So not just plan to say, okay, we're going to do and start with this little piece over here. We think of it like to solve the problem, what we would need to do it at scale within life sciences. Going back, for example, when we started on the how to run studies differently, we not only started on the US and then we'll work out how to do it in other countries. We always knew that we would need to run it across more than 30 countries. So the plan would need to not only make it work, but make it work across 30 countries. And that's how we ended up obviously scaling across more than 50 very, very rapidly as well. So it still exists. I think we see probably a difference within life sciences, the ones that have a clear vision in terms of where they want to go with the transformation, and then they align with partners and they align the factions to get there, and the other ones that are like in a playground of pilot to try to see which ones sticks. And there are some, I don't know if you there are some articles in terms of some pharma companies, they have done a review of their current AI use cases. I think there was one pharma company specifically that was highlighting that they had 900 programs, but only 10% providing some benefits. Yeah. So there is it's still happening. So my advice would be make sure that you do less, focus on the big picture and understanding the bigger problem that you're trying to solve. Obviously, get the right partners, but make sure that you're aiming not only to prove the first step, but you're aiming to solve the problem at scale.
Mm-hmm. And say a couple words, Christy, if you would, about some of them, because I know you've there's a couple press releases recently. One was this interesting collaboration you did with this group called Quantum Leap Healthcare, working on breast cancer monitoring. I think you're going to be doing some stuff with interstitial lung disease. For the the publicly disclosed stuff, can you say a couple words about the type of partners and organizations that you're working with? Because obviously, as you were just pointing out, you can't work with thousands, and there's literally thousands out there that are again doing pilots. But say a few words about the ones you're allowed to talk about.
No, so what we can talk about is so obviously we've launched a separate company 18 months ago. It's probably going to be soon 2 years since launching externally. We have agreements with 15 life sciences, so that includes 6 large pharma, CROs and biotechs. So we have been successful in terms of doing those partnerships across the industry. Problems are the same. The ask are the same. The pilotitis that happens obviously in certain places more than others. But we have seen a really big acceleration, especially in the last 6 to 9 months, in terms of rethinking how to transform clinical development with AI. So there has been a really big push across companies in those efforts. And we're really excited, obviously, that we're able to support companies like Quantum Leap, biotech companies, as well as much larger pharma companies, which we'll be disclosing externally very soon. But yeah, no, very exciting that the industry-wide problems, they do want to obviously work to solve them, and the problems are the same. And we're very passionate to have amazing customers that we can do the changes now, not only with digital, but with AI, as well as part of the Evinova platform.
Right. And then just, again, coming back to you and obviously your passion for the innovation in this space, and I was, thinking about Quantum Leap for a minute. I've done a couple episodes recently, and sort of some of the companies that are getting their feet wet in quantum computing and applications for pharma. I've done a couple digital twins episodes. To you personally, whether Evinova is going to invest in this stuff or not, what are the technologies, looking out 5 years, 10 years? What's the stuff that gets you excited in terms of the stuff that might be, a little over the horizon now, but hey, in a couple of years, you're probably going to be investing in X, Y, and Z. Anything that excites you personally, please.
So Quantum Leap is actually not a technology company.
Right.
It's actually they're running very large and very innovative clinical trials. So we were helping them in terms of the technology or it's quite interesting. There is probably two types of individuals: the ones that get really excited about the technology and the new mechanisms to do change. I get more excited for the change itself.
Right.
Yeah. So actually, if we can do big change even with technology that exists now, I think it's the out of I get really excited that we can do a lot of change already within clinical development with technology that exists right now. So I'm not answering your question, Ira. We're obviously working on different partnerships, which we'll be communicating soon. But I get really passionate about the outcomes, the making the change that truly makes a difference, that gets medicine much faster to patients, that really improves the outcomes. And some of that technology, in some cases it's old technology to be completely honest, but it's still, there are companies that are still working on paper. Right. So let's reimagine that actually with the technologies obviously that exist, with the availability of platforms that we're already creating as part of Evinova, the art of the possible in terms of what the changes that are possible now in clinical development is much bigger than anything that we have seen before as well.
Gotcha. Cristina, final talking point while I have you today. I know that you get out there and do a lot of the conference circuits, digital health conferences, and clinical trial innovation. What's coming up that we should know about for the rest of the year as we get into 2026? Places that you're going to be talking, conferences, places we could run into and meet you and the Evinova team. Anything else while we have you today, please?
Yeah, so we're running, so the conference season restarts. So there is obviously always the heavy part in the beginning of the year. There is a bit quieter period in August where we're doing now this podcast, and it's running up to the September, October, November crazy time. So there is DFAM coming up in the US. There is a Scope coming in Europe. There is ESMO as well. We also go to the more scientific conferences. So you will find us at ESMO. Also, they have for the first year ESMO AI. Where from an oncology perspective, the excitement about the new opportunities with AI will be available as well, and many others. So DIA, there is lots coming up in the second half of the year as well. There is some obviously global conference, there is some China conference, Japan conferences, but because we are actually global, so we're running quite, we're a bit dividing the team to make sure that we can be everywhere. So I'm very excited to obviously meet many of our customers at those events as well.
Outstanding. No, it's again, I very much enjoy the topic of digital health and these really interesting tools. It's awesome to see organizations like yours scaling them up and making them available all over the world. So wishing you the best with all this as you continue to grow the organization and your team. Again, for everybody that's going to be listening to this episode across the various podcast networks or who will be watching on the YouTube channel, Again, you've been spending time with Cristina Durán, president of Evinova, doing really amazing things to accelerate better health outcomes for patients using these novel digital health solutions. Again, Cristina, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us for a little while today, to talk about what you're up to. Thank you for everything you do for patients. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for there's so many people out there, be what you're doing. Really a great story.
Thank you.